Now, before we get into this video, I just want to let you guys know that I had a really awesome person join me for this. He's never been on the channel, but I'm telling you right now, check out story 2. You're gonna love it. Let's begin. I always thought that legends of skinwalkers were just that. Legends. Tales to scare children around campfires, to keep them from wandering too far in the wilderness. But then, I came face to face with one, and I realized they were just all too real. It happened when I was out camping in the middle of nowhere, far away from civilization. I had always loved the wilderness, the feeling of just being completely cut off from the world. But that night, something felt off. The air was sick and oppressive, and I could hear strange noises coming from the darkness. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that I was just in my imagination or something, that I was just being paranoid. But as the night wore on, the noise grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like something was scratching at the walls of my tent, trying to get in. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but I knew deep down that it was something far more sinister. And then, just as sudden as it had all started, the scratching stopped. The air grew still and quiet, and I felt a sense of dread settle over me. That's when I heard the whispering. It was a low, guttural growl, like nothing I had ever heard before. It was coming from just outside of my tent, and it seemed to be growing louder and more insistent by the second. I wanted to run, to flee into safety of my car and drive far away from this place. But something held me back. Some morbid curiosity that made me want to know what was out there. And then it happened. The tent shook violently, as if something was trying to tear it apart from the outside. I could hear the fabric tearing, and I knew that I was in mortal danger. Then suddenly, as it had started, it stopped again. The air grew still and quiet once again, and I was left sitting in my tent, alone with my thoughts. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat there, waiting for the sun to rise, listening to the whispers that seemed to be echoes in my head. And when the dawn finally broke, I knew that I had to get out of there. I packed up my things and got into the car, driving as fast as I could, away from this cursed place. And as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Something that had latched onto me like a parasite. I don't know if I'll ever go back into the wilderness again. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I know that there are things out there that we can't explain or understand. Skinwalkers are real, and they're not just legends. There's something far more terrifying, something that can shatter our understanding of the world around us. And I fear that they are still out there, waiting in the darkness for their next victim.
A little backstory for me to explain what I believe is a possible skinwalker encounter about a year and a half ago. I'm a 27-year-old male, and I've lived in Utah my whole life. I used to be part of the church until I was about 14 because I didn't believe and had questions that seemed to have answers that didn't make sense or had holes in them. The reason I say this is that I've known about skinwalkers and wendigos from an early age. Being in Utah, we all hear about them and about Skinwalker Ranch. The whole Native American stories just seems to make sense to me, and I was told that speaking of skinwalkers would put you on a metaphorical list for them to hunt you or something of the sorts. I hope it's not true. Anyway, as an 18-year-old, I started to date a girl whose family was Native American. I think she was part Shoshone. I can't remember. Well, after a year or two of dating her, I got to visit the res where her tribe was from, in Pocatello, Idaho. Her grandfather was full-blood Native American. He was a top guy, a chief or something like that. I honestly can't remember. At dinner, a few days into the stay, I asked him about Wendigos and skinwalkers. The dinner table got very quiet real fast. He told me to not bring that subject up during dinner. Later that night, he came to our room and told me about them, the history of them, how they came about, etc. He spoke of them in a serious yet cautious way, like how a parent warns their child about something and tries to teach or explain the dangers of something. I don't know the right word for it. After that night, I didn't speak to them, think about them, and tried to avoid conversations about them due to what our grandfather had told me. I don't know if he was trying to screw with me because I'm your typical white guy or whatever. I don't know, but I totally believed the story and the history of it all. Here is the encounter. A couple years down the road, her and I split due to us falling apart. A couple of years after that, I met my wife in 2019. We got married in March of 2022 and found out we were pregnant in July of 2022. We were happy and nervous for our lives ahead of us. After about a week or so after finding out, we decided to go camping, seeing it may be one of the few times we had to ourselves before our kid came. So we went up to Affleck Park Campground up by Salt Lake City in the Wasatch Mountains. The campground was empty, and we didn't see any other tents or cars. We got all set up, had dinner, talked around the campfire, and hung out. Well, it was bedtime. We got in the tent and talked some more. Both of us heard what we assumed was just rats or little animals walking around the bushes and trees. We fell asleep after a while. While we slept, I had this dream, or at least I think or hope it was. This dream was that I was asleep in my tent with my wife at that same campground right where I was physically, and there was a rustling of bushes and trees and an ominous feeling of dread or fear in the air. There was something circling our tent. Looking at the tent, I could feel it wanted to be inside the tent with us. The next part I remember as if I was awake, watching it happen in real time. This dog, wolf, black as a bottomless pit with sharp yellow eyes, stood over us while we slept, just watching us, almost like an out-of-body experience. While this black dog or wolf stood over us while we slept in the dream, I was awake, having a feeling of this unknown beast was standing over us and watching us sleep. I pretended to be asleep, but keeping my eyes shut, but I could feel it staring at me, as if it knew I was faking being asleep. The dog or wolf just stood over my wife and I, watching us the whole night while I pretended to be asleep in my dream. When I woke up the next morning, I remember peeking my eyes open, checking to see if anything was there. Nothing. The tent zipper was all closed, so I asked my wife if she had a weird dream last night. She said she did, but didn't say much after that regarding dreams. After getting dressed, I packed us up in a hurry, skipping breakfast, and left. A year and a half later, I still remember the feeling of the dog or wolf with its yellow eyes staring at me, as if it knew my conscious self was aware of what was happening. At work last week, a coworker brought up the subject of skinwalkers and wendigos. At the sound of the subject, those feelings of dread, fear, and helplessness entered my body, and I felt my hairs raise. Being a construction worker for a little over 5 years, I wouldn't say I'm badass at all, but I'm used to uncomfortable situations. But I became scared looking for a way out. I could just see those eyes, as if they were in front of me. Would this be considered an encounter? If not totally understood, I just remember being taught that skinwalkers can enter one's mind through dreams. So sorry for the long post. I just felt a need to get this out there. I live in a kind of rural part of Utah. Now I will get up in the middle of the night about once every week or 2 weeks or so and look out the window to check the field across from my third-story condo, just looking for anything not natural. Am I crazy for letting a dream get to me or not? Thanks.
It was a weekend and I was out hunting in the northern forest of Wisconsin. I was walking through the woods and it was nearly dark when I came across a clearing. It couldn't have been more than 50 feet in diameter. But then I saw it. The largest buck I had ever seen before. I then laid down on my stomach and pointed my rifle at its heart. The buck must have heard me as it looked in my direction, but it didn't see me, so it went back to gazing in the field. As I pulled the trigger of my rifle, a large branch snapped behind, and I thought I saw a wolf running off beside me, causing me to flinch and miss my shot, hitting the buck in the side of the torso, as the buck let out a scream. I knew I had hit something important, as its side was gushing blood. It still ran, but I knew it would die at some point because of this wound. I just had to follow the blood trail as it ran. I followed the blood trail for a few minutes before coming across a much larger clearing, at least 300 feet in diameter, and I saw movement at the other end of this clearing. Thinking it was the buck, I got back onto my stomach and chest and aimed my scope at the movement to see what it was. Seeing a wolf eating the buck. I was disappointed that the wolf had killed the buck before I could, but I just watched it, all in awe of cruelty, yet beauty of nature. But then I saw something. Was that a hand where the wolf's paw should be? No, it couldn't be. It must have just been a scratch from the wolf. But did it have human teeth? I shifted a bit in my spot to try to see better, snapping a twig. There's no way a wolf could have heard me, but its head then snapped up to me on a small plateau that was raised. It looked like it had human eyes through the scope, and it looked like it smiled at me, and it then stood up on its hind legs, still looking at me, deer's throat gripped in its long, fingered hand. This scared me so much I dropped my rifle, and in the second it took me to look down and grab my rifle again, the wolf was already halfway across the clearing. There was no way it could have gotten there that fast. As I looked back up at it, it stopped running, still looking at me. What the fuck? I whispered under my breath, terrified. I stayed where I was and stood up with my rifle aimed at it, still looking at this wolf. There was no way it could have been a wolf. But the one thing I've learned from my 16 years of hunting and camping: never turn your back and run from a predator that was hunting you. The wolf opened its mouth like it was yawning, but it let out a scream-sounding part human and part of a howl and part of an animalistic screech, as it then looked like the wolf frowned at me, like it was disappointed in me standing my ground, before walking back to the deer and crouching down before continuing to eat it. I turned and ran for at least an hour back to my car. That horrifying screaming played in my ears. It stayed in my head on repeat before I practically dived into my car. It was the happiest I had ever been to see this old piece of shit in my entire life as I drove home. I didn't turn the radio on. I just drove in silence. When I got home, I just cried in my car from fear of what had happened to me, and just the joy of finally being safe for at least 5 minutes before finally getting out of the car and running into my house. I locked every door and window and pulled every curtain shut. If you ever go hunting in the northern Wisconsin, do not stay if you come across a wolf eating. I promise this is true. Those things don't like when you stare. before you even exit the video, I need you to do me a favor. Please, please, please go show VIIDITH some love. I've been wanting to do this collab for God knows how long now. But he did a fantastic job. I honestly, I was blown away from his narration. It was fantastic. And God, you've got to love that voice. But a huge shout out to him, and please go show him some love. Make sure to go subscribe to his channel. Go check out his content. Trust me, it's 100% worth it. Not gonna lie, I binge his content sometimes, just saying. I mean, have you guys ever seen somebody else post a 10-hour-long video? It's just a story, it's a narration of a story. Who else does that? And who else sounds like that and does that? Dude, my hat's off to him. Props to him and props to his channel. It's fantastic. I will have his links down in the description, along with mine like Twitter, Instagram, everything like that. And also, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you would like to see more, make sure to subscribe. I've got a lot of content and a lot of projects, I could say, that I'm working on right now. So, make sure to go check those out when they come out. But with that being said, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one. VIIDITH, thank you so much for doing this. I love you. Okay, bye.